I always believed that if you ticked all the right boxes, life would be like one of those glossy magazine covers, perfect, enviable, complete. That's what I had, or so it seemed. As I stood in our sprawling kitchen, sunlight streaming through the bay windows, I marveled at the irony of my life. To anyone peering through those windows, my husband, Mark, and I were the epitome of marital bliss. "Jenna, you've outdone yourself with this quiche," Mark said, his voice warm with appreciation. His clean-cut features, accentuated by the morning light, made him look like someone straight out of a high-end fashion ad. I forced a smile, my hands busy arranging the freshly baked quiche on our pristine marble countertop. "It's nothing, really. Just something I whipped up," I replied, my voice a practiced melody of domestic contentment. Mark wrapped his arms around me from behind, planting a gentle kiss on my cheek. "You're amazing, you know that?" he whispered, his breath warm against my skin. I nodded, a hollow feeling gnawing at my insides. There was a time when his touch would set my world ablaze, but now, it felt like a well-rehearsed part of our daily routine. As he left for work, immaculately dressed in his bespoke suit, our neighbors, the Thompsons, waved at us from across the street. Their envious smiles said it all. We were the perfect couple, living in the perfect house, in the perfect neighborhood. But the truth was far from it. Once alone, the silence of the house engulfed me. I wandered through the rooms, each one impeccably decorated, a testament to our successful, upper-middle-class life. But as I ran my fingers over the Italian leather couch, a sense of emptiness crept in. I thought back to the early days of our marriage, filled with passion and spontaneous adventures. Now, our conversations were limited to work schedules, social events, and the occasional holiday planning. We were like well-oiled cogs in a machine, efficient but devoid of any real connection. I sat down at the piano, a grand Steinway that was more a piece of decor than an instrument. As my fingers danced over the keys, playing a melody from a forgotten time, I closed my eyes. The music was a gateway to a past filled with laughter, love, and genuine happiness. A single tear escaped my eye, tracing a silent path down my cheek. "Mommy, are you playing for me?" A tiny voice pulled me back to reality. It was our daughter, Lily, her bright eyes filled with innocent wonder. I quickly wiped away the tear and turned to her with a smile. "Of course, sweetheart. Would you like to hear a song?" As I played her favorite lullaby, her giggles filled the room, momentarily piercing the veil of my loneliness. In her, I found a fleeting respite from the turmoil within. But as the day progressed, and Lily left for her ballet class, the silence returned, heavier than before. I realized, amidst the quiet echoes of our grand home, that I was living a life many dreamed of but few would envy if they knew the truth. I was a prisoner of perfection, trapped in a gilded cage of my own making. And the worst part? I had no idea how to escape. Life has a funny way of throwing you curveballs when you least expect it. For me, that curveball came in the form of Alex, the new guy at work. It was a Tuesday, just another mundane day at the office, until he walked in. Alex, with his disarming smile and an air of confidence that was hard to ignore. "Jenna, this is Alex, our new project manager," my boss introduced us. His hand felt warm and sure in mine, a stark contrast to the cold, predictable touches I'd grown accustomed to. "Nice to meet you, Jenna. I've heard great things about you," Alex said, his eyes lingering on mine a moment longer than necessary. I brushed off the flutter in my stomach as mere politeness, but who was I kidding? There was an undeniable spark, an electric current that ran through me, awakening something I thought had long since died. I found myself looking forward to work, a place I had associated with monotony for so long. Alex's presence was like a breath of fresh air, and our conversations, initially about work, gradually became more personal. His laughter was infectious, his stories captivating, and his subtle flirts, though risky, were thrilling. One evening, after a successful project completion, our team decided to celebrate. The night was filled with laughter and drinks, and somehow, Alex and I ended up alone. "Just one dance," he whispered, his hand extended toward me. I knew it was wrong, but in that moment, all my reservations melted away. As we danced, his hands on my waist, mine around his neck, the rest of the world faded away. It was exhilarating, dangerous, and utterly irresponsible. I went home that night, my mind a whirlwind of emotions. I told myself it was just a dance, nothing more. But deep down, I knew it was the beginning of something far more complicated. Over the next few weeks, our encounters became more frequent, more intimate. The guilt was always there, nagging at the back of my mind, but I pushed it aside. I convinced myself that a brief affair wouldn't hurt anyone. After all, my marriage was nothing more than a well-orchestrated show. This was real, or so I wanted to believe. It was during one of our clandestine meetings that I had my first slip. Mark called, and I ignored it, too caught up in the moment. But when I finally checked my phone, my heart sank. He had left several messages, worried because I hadn't come home from my overtime work. I fabricated a story about a delayed project and a dead phone battery. Mark bought it, or at least, he didn't question it further. But the close call shook me. The reality of what I was doing hit me hard. I was playing with fire, risking everything for a fleeting moment of happiness. As I lay in bed that night, Mark's steady breathing beside me, a part of me wanted to confess, to end this madness. But another part, a darker, more selfish part, wasn't ready to let go of the thrill that Alex brought into my life. I was walking a tightrope, and I couldn't help but wonder when I would inevitably fall. It's bizarre how quickly things spiral out of control, how a single misstep can send you tumbling down a rabbit hole. That's exactly what happened with me and Alex. Our affair, once a thrilling escape, had turned into an obsession, blurring the lines between right and wrong. I began to neglect my responsibilities, both at work and home. Texts from Alex were answered immediately, no matter what I was doing. I started making up excuses to see him, excuses that were thin veils over my recklessness. Mark, ever the attentive husband, started to pick up on the changes. It was the little things at first, missed dinners, forgotten conversations, and my constant distraction. I could see the confusion in his eyes, turning slowly into suspicion. "Is everything all right, Jenna? You seem distant lately," Mark asked one evening, his voice laced with concern. "Just tired, that's all." I brushed it off with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. But the guilt, like a heavy chain around my neck, was getting harder to ignore. Mark wasn't convinced. I could feel his gaze on me, searching for answers I wasn't ready to give. He started doing his own digging, piecing together my lies and half-truths. The man I thought was too loving to ever suspect me of betrayal was slowly uncovering the truth. One night, I came home late from another secret rendezvous with Alex, my mind a whirlwind of conflicted emotions. As I opened the door, the sight that greeted me froze me in my tracks. There sat Mark, in the dimly lit living room, an array of photos and messages spread out on the coffee table, undeniable evidence of my affair. His face was a mix of anger, pain, and betrayal. "Mark, Words failed me as I stood there, caught in the act. "So, it's true then?" His voice was calm, but I could hear the underlying tremor. "How long, Jenna?" The confrontation was like a slap in the face, a wake-up call to the reality I had been avoiding. I wanted to deny it, to run away from the mess I had created. But the truth was there, staring me in the face. "It started a few months ago. I'm so sorry, Mark." My voice was barely a whisper, choked with tears. "Sorry? You destroy our marriage, and all you can say is sorry?" The hurt in his eyes was something I will never forget. We talked, or rather, he talked, and I listened. Mark poured out his feelings, the hurt, the betrayal, the disbelief. I had shattered his trust, the very foundation of our marriage. As he spoke, the realization of what I had done began to sink in. I had risked everything for a fleeting affair, hurting the one person who had always been there for me. That night, I lay awake in our bed, Mark on the far side, a chasm between us. The life I had so carefully built was crumbling around me, and I had no one to blame but myself. The next morning, Mark was gone, off to clear his head, leaving me alone with my guilt and a marriage hanging by a thread. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that regret is a formidable adversary. It clings to you, a constant reminder of what you've lost. And right now, it's my unrelenting companion. After Mark left, saying he needed time to think, the house felt more like a tomb than a home. The silence was deafening, broken only by the ticking of the clock and the occasional distant laughter of children playing outside, a stark contrast to the turmoil inside me. I tried reaching out to Mark, sending him texts, leaving voicemails. But he remained unreachable, his silence more painful than any words of anger. I knew I had hurt him deeply, but the extent of the damage was becoming more apparent with each passing day. The guilt was overwhelming. I spent hours sitting in the living room, staring at the photos of us on the walls, memories of a happier time. I realized how much I had taken for granted, how foolishly I had risked everything for a fleeting thrill. Alex, the man I thought was an escape, turned out to be just a catalyst for my downfall. When I told him about the confrontation with Mark, expecting support or at least some understanding, he was indifferent. It was fun while it lasted, he said, shrugging it off. The realization that I was nothing more than a temporary diversion for him was a bitter pill to swallow. The days turned into weeks. I tried to keep myself busy, to fill the void left by Mark's absence. I threw myself into work, but it was no use. My concentration was shot, my work suffered, and soon my boss called me in for a talk. "Jenna, your performance has been slipping. Is everything all right?" he asked, concern in his eyes. I wanted to pour my heart out, to tell him everything, but I held back. "I'm going through some personal issues. I'll try to do better," I managed to say. My social life, once a whirlwind of dinners and parties, came to a standstill. Friends who once envied my perfect life now whispered behind my back. I became a pariah, my affair the juicy gossip at cocktail parties. The few who did reach out did so out of curiosity rather than genuine concern. Evenings were the hardest. The house, once filled with laughter and love, now echoed with the ghosts of my past mistakes. I would sit by the window, watching as the world moved on without me, lost in a sea of regret. I tried to make amends, to find some way to fix the unfixable. But every attempt felt like trying to patch up a dam with a piece of tape. The more I tried, the more everything seemed to crumble around me. I realized that in my pursuit of something I thought I was missing, I had lost everything that truly mattered. Mark, my anchor, the love of my life, was now a stranger, his absence a gaping hole in my existence. I lay awake at night, the weight of my actions crushing me. The realization that I was the architect of my own misery was a haunting thought. The road to redemption seemed impossible, a path shrouded in uncertainty and pain. But it was a path I knew I had to take, not just for Mark, but for myself. In the aftermath of a storm, they say the sun eventually shines. But in the wake of my personal hurricane, all I could see were clouds. And then came the news that pierced through the fog like a cold, hard blade. I remember the day vividly. The morning had started like any other in my new, solitary existence. But as I sat at the kitchen table, nursing a cup of coffee, the doorbell rang, slicing through the quiet. Standing at the door was a courier with an envelope. "Jenna Reynolds?" he asked. I nodded, a sense of foreboding washing over me. As I tore open the envelope, my hands trembled. Inside were legal papers. Mark was filing for divorce. I sank to the floor, the papers slipping from my fingers. The finality of it all hit me like a tidal wave. This was real. Mark was moving on, and he was doing it through the cold, impersonal channels of the law. The man I thought would forgive me, who I thought was too loving to ever leave, was proving me wrong in the most definitive way possible. But it wasn't just the divorce. Mark was seeking a substantial part of our shared assets. It was his right, of course. He had contributed as much as I had to our life together, if not more. But the realization that he was serious about cutting all ties was a bitter pill to swallow. In the days that followed, I found myself reflecting on who Mark really was. For years, I had painted him in my mind as the steady, predictable one. But now, faced with the end of our marriage, I began to see a different side of him. Mark, the man I married, was more than just a loving husband. He was strong, decisive, and had a depth I had never truly appreciated. His actions now showed a man who was not just hurt, but also resilient, determined to rebuild his life without me. I learned that he had started new hobbies, things he never would have done before. He joined a hiking group, something I would have never imagined him doing. He was exploring life on his own terms, finding a new identity beyond being my husband. As the legal battle progressed, we met a few times, always in the presence of our lawyers. Gone was the warmth in his eyes when he looked at me. In its place was a polite indifference that stung more than any words of anger could have. During these meetings, I watched him, this new version of Mark. He was confident, articulate, and knew exactly what he wanted. It was as if I was seeing him for the first time, and the realization that I had lost someone so special was crushing. I remember one particular meeting where our eyes met across the table. For a moment, I saw a flicker of the old Mark, the one who used to look at me with so much love. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a steely resolve. As I left that meeting, I couldn't help but feel a profound sense of loss. Not just for the marriage that was ending, but for the man I had never fully known or appreciated. I had taken him for granted, and now he was showing me, and the world, who he really was. In the quiet of my now too big house, I pondered over the many facets of Mark that had remained hidden from me. It was a sobering thought, that sometimes, we don't truly see the people closest to us until we're about to lose them. Never did I imagine that loneliness could have such a biting chill. Since the news of the divorce and my affair had spread, my social circle had shrunk to a dot. Friends, once a phone call away, now crossed the street to avoid me. The community I thought was mine had sided with Mark, their cold shoulders speaking volumes of my fallen grace. I remember walking into our favorite cafe, a place where Mark and I had shared countless brunches, only to be met with icy stares. The whispers were like daggers. That's her, the one who cheated on Mark. Each word stung, a reminder of the life I had so carelessly thrown away. But the most jarring blow came when I learned the truth about Alex. The man I had risked everything for was not the person I thought he was. Through overheard conversations and uncomfortable truths from mutual acquaintances, I learned about his history of short-lived affairs, each ending in a similar pattern. I was just another notch on his belt, a realization that filled me with disgust and self-loathing. The day I confronted Alex, I saw him for who he truly was. His charming facade crumbled, revealing a manipulative man who preyed on vulnerability. "What did you expect, Jenna? We were just having fun," he said nonchalantly, his words cutting through me. Walking away from him, from that chapter of my life, was both painful and liberating. The pain came from acknowledging my foolishness, but the liberation came from shedding the illusion I had clung to. In the following weeks, I spent a lot of time alone, my thoughts my only company. I would sit by the window, watching the world go by, reflecting on the choices I had made. The house, once a symbol of my perfect life, now felt like a prison, each room echoing with memories of a past I could never return to. This solitude forced me to confront the ugly truths about myself. I had been selfish, chasing after a mirage of excitement, completely oblivious to the destruction I was leaving in my wake. I had hurt Mark, the man who had given me nothing but love and loyalty. I had tarnished my reputation, lost friends who had been part of my life for years. It was during these moments of introspection that I truly began to understand the depth of my mistake. I had taken my life for granted, my loving husband, my beautiful daughter, my friends. I had thrown it all away for a fleeting thrill, and now I was paying the price. But amidst the ruins of my life, I found a flicker of hope. It was the realization that as long as I was breathing, it was not too late to change. I began reading, writing, trying to find solace in the words of those who had walked this path of regret before me. I started therapy, a difficult but necessary step towards healing. As days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, I found a certain peace in my solitude. It was a hard-earned peace, born out of the chaos I had created. I knew the road ahead would be long and challenging, but for the first time in a long while, I felt ready to walk it. Not to undo the past, but to build a better future, one where I was fully aware of the value of everything and everyone I had taken for granted. Hitting rock bottom has a way of stripping away the veneer from life, leaving you face to face with the rawest version of yourself. That's where I found myself when I lost my job. The scandal of my affair had seeped into every corner of my life, tarnishing my professional reputation beyond repair. I remember sitting in my now far too quiet home office, the echoes of my former boss's words still bouncing around in my head. "I'm sorry, Jenna, but the company can't be associated with this kind of scandal." Just like that, my career, something I had worked so hard for, vanished into thin air. It was in that moment of utter desolation, surrounded by the remnants of my shattered life, that clarity struck me like a bolt of lightning. I needed to change, not for Mark, not for anyone else, but for myself. I was at a crossroads, and the path I chose now would define the rest of my life. The journey of self-improvement is never a straight line, and mine was no exception. I started therapy, confronting the demons of my past and the insecurities that had led me down this destructive path. The sessions were tough, often leaving me emotionally drained, but with each one, I felt a little more weight lifting from my shoulders. Reconnecting with old friends was another hurdle. Many were hesitant at first, their trust in me understandably shaken. But slowly, through coffee meetups and heartfelt conversations, I started to mend some of the bridges I had burned. There were small victories, moments that shone like beacons of hope in my otherwise stormy world. I started freelance work, finding solace in the routine and purpose it brought. I also began volunteering at a local community center, an experience that opened my eyes to the struggles and triumphs of others. But the most unexpected help came from an old acquaintance, Lisa, whom I had known in passing but never really connected with. She reached out to me, having gone through her own set of challenges. Her empathy and understanding were like a balm to my weary soul. We became each other's support system, our friendship a testament to the power of second chances. Through these experiences, I began to rediscover my self-worth, not as a wife or a high-flying executive, but as Jenna, flawed, resilient, and evolving. I learned to find joy in the little things: a well-written article, a smile from a stranger, the satisfaction of helping someone